The vacuum of space holds countless secrets, whispers of civilizations beyond our understanding. Against the backdrop of a dying mining colony on Kepler-42, Drake Harding's calloused hands had known only the rhythmic violence of drill and stone. 10 years since he'd surrendered his military uniform for exile among the asteroids, among people who asked no questions. Yet in the darkness of a crater's shadow, fate offered him a second chance. A luminescent pod cradled like a tear in the moon's dust, and within it, eyes that reflected distant stars Drake had long forgotten. That night, as the alien child slumbered beside him, the void beyond his window seemed to pulse with something new, something calling, something that knew his name. The mining colony of New Appalachia sprawled across the lunar surface of Kepler-42b like an industrial scar, all sharp angles and oxidized metal that had lost its luster years ago. Drake Harding wiped sweat from his brow and adjusted the settings on his exosuit's environmental controls. Even after a decade, he hadn't fully acclimated to the swings in temperature that occurred when working the outer tunnels where the atmosphere regulators struggled to maintain consistency. Today marked the 8th straight day of 12-hour shifts, but complaining wouldn't bring additional ration credits or earn sympathy from the corporate overseers who monitored productivity from orbital stations. "Harding, you're lagging in Section 12. Push those numbers or management's gonna dock your pay again." The voice of Foreman Reeves crackled through his helmet comm, irritation evident even through the static. Drake grunted in acknowledgement, lifting the industrial-grade plasma drill and pressing it against the rock face. The vibrations traveled up his arms, dulled somewhat by the exosuit's dampeners, but still strong enough to remind him that he wasn't getting any younger. At 42, his body kept a careful inventory of old wounds, the shrapnel scars across his back, the rebuilt knee that ached during long shifts, and the phantom pain in fingers long replaced by synthetic prosthetics. "I'll hit quota," he responded finally, knowing Reeves was still waiting for verbal confirmation. Just needed to recalibrate the drill head. These older models run hot in the deep sections. The lie came easily. Drake had actually stopped to examine a strange reading on his scanner, an anomalous energy signature that didn't match the typical profile of the rare earth minerals they usually hunted. But after years of working these tunnels, he'd learned when to keep discoveries to himself. The company claimed ownership of everything found on site, with bonuses that amounted to pocket change compared to the profits they reaped. Whatever this was, he'd investigate after his shift. Hours later, as the colony's artificial lighting shifted to the amber hue that signaled evening cycle, Drake avoided the communal mess hall. He grabbed a protein pack from his quarters and slipped past the guard station at the northeastern quadrant with practiced ease. Being one of the longest-serving miners had its advantages. People stopped questioning your movements, assumed you were running maintenance tasks or following special orders. The scanner remained clipped to his belt, reconfigured to mask its active scanning functions from the colony's monitoring systems. Drake had modified several of his tools over the years, adaptations from skills learned during his military days when he'd served as a combat engineer in the Mars territorial conflicts. Those skills, like the reasons for his dishonorable discharge, were topics he deliberately avoided in the few conversations he had with fellow miners. The energy signature grew stronger as he navigated the abandoned development tunnels. Leftovers from an expansion project, the company had halted when mineral yields proved less lucrative than projected. Drake's flashlight cut through the darkness, casting long shadows against the rough-hewn walls. The tunnels eventually opened into a natural cavern the initial survey teams had discovered, a massive open space beneath the moon's surface that the company had deemed non-essential for current operations. What awaited him there stole the breath from his lungs. The crash had carved a path through the cavern's ceiling, leaving a trail of debris and scorched rock. The vessel, if that's what it was, measured roughly 4 meters in length and bore no resemblance to any human design Drake had encountered. Its surface shimmered with an iridescence that seemed to absorb and reflect light simultaneously. The metal, if it was metal, flowing in curves that defied conventional engineering. No hard angles, no visible propulsion systems, no identifiable access points. Drake approached cautiously, military instincts reawakening after years of dormancy. His hand instinctively moved to where a sidearm would have been holstered, finding nothing but the utility knife all miners carried. The colony existed in a demilitarized zone. Official weapons remained locked in the security office, accessible only to authorized personnel during emergencies. "Hello," he called out, immediately feeling foolish. What was he expecting? That whatever piloted this thing would understand English? The vessel gave no response, but as Drake circled it, he noticed a hairline fracture running along what he assumed was the craft's lateral side. The fracture emanated a soft blue luminescence, pulsing in a rhythm that seemed almost biological. Without conscious thought, he reached toward it, fingers hovering centimeters above the strange material. The surface parted beneath his touch like water, revealing the interior of the craft. Drake stumbled back, catching himself before falling. Inside, nestled in what appeared to be a cocoon of the same flowing material as the hull, lay a small figure. No, Drake realized with startling certainty. She was clearly not human. Approximately the size of a human toddler, the being possessed skin the color of burnished copper that seemed to shimmer with subtle patterns that shifted beneath the surface. Where a human would have hair, this being had what looked like fine crystalline structures that caught the light of his flashlight and fractured it into prismatic patterns against the cavern walls. Its face, her face, held large, almond-shaped eyes currently closed in what Drake assumed was unconsciousness, or some alien equivalent. The decision to bring her back to his quarters wasn't one Drake consciously made. It was instinct, the same instinct that had once driven him to carry wounded comrades across battlefields under heavy fire. The alien child was injured. That much was clear from the discoloration along one side of her body and the irregular rhythm of her breathing. Whatever ethical or legal considerations existed regarding first contact protocols seemed abstract and distant compared to the immediate need before him. Using his exosuit's enhanced strength, Drake carefully extracted the child from the vessel. She weighed less than he expected, perhaps 15 kilograms, and her body temperature ran significantly higher than human norm, like holding a gentle fever against his chest. The colony's sensors would detect an additional life form if he wasn't careful, so Drake deactivated his suit's tracking beacon and took the maintenance tunnels back to his quarters. His living space was Spartan, even by colony standards, a single room with attached hygiene facility, furnished with only the essentials issued to all personnel. Drake had accumulated few personal possessions during his decade in exile. A battered physical copy of Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, a smooth stone from the shores of Lake Michigan, and a small wooden box containing military insignia he couldn't bring himself to discard were the only indications that the space belonged to him rather than any other transient miner. Drake fashioned a makeshift bed from spare clothing and placed the alien child upon it. In the improved lighting of his quarters, he could better assess her condition. The discoloration he'd noticed appeared to be bruising, though the purple-green hue was more pronounced than would be on human skin. A clear fluid seeped from a small wound near what would be the temple on a human, crystallizing almost immediately upon contact with air. "What am I supposed to do with you?" Drake muttered, running a hand through his graying hair. His medical knowledge was limited to battlefield triage and the basic first aid required of all miners. Nothing that prepared him for treating an entirely different species. As if in response to his voice, the alien child's eyes fluttered open, and Drake found himself frozen in place. Her eyes contained no iris or pupil. Instead, they were filled with what looked like swirling nebulae, distant stars and cosmic dust in constant motion. They fixed on him with unmistakable intelligence, and Drake felt a sudden pressure inside his mind, gentle but insistent, like fingers testing the give of a membrane. "Easy now," he said softly, holding up his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of non-aggression. "I'm not going to hurt you. You're safe here." The pressure in his mind increased momentarily before withdrawing. The alien child made a sound, a soft trilling that rose and fell in complex patterns. Though Drake couldn't understand the vocalizations, he sensed they weren't expressions of fear or pain. The child struggled to sit up, and Drake instinctively moved to assist her, careful to telegraph his movements. "Slow and easy," he said, supporting her back. "You took quite a hit in that crash." The child studied him with those cosmic eyes, head tilting in an eerily human expression of curiosity. One small hand, four-fingered with an additional digit located where a human's wrist would be, reached toward Drake's face. He remained still, allowing the contact. Her touch was warm, almost hot, against his cheek, and the strange pressure returned to his mind. Then, with shocking clarity, a single word formed in his consciousness. Protector. Drake jerked back in surprise, nearly toppling his chair. "Did you just—" he began, then stopped. "Can you understand me?" The alien child made another trilling sound, but no further words appeared in Drake's mind. Instead, she pointed toward the small viewport in his quarters, little more than a reinforced porthole that offered a view of the starscape beyond the colony. Following her gesture, Drake looked toward the viewport. The stars seemed unusually bright tonight, their light penetrating the typical haze of dust that surrounded the mining operation. One star in particular caught his attention, a blue-white giant that pulsed with a rhythm that matched the breathing of the child. Is that your home?" he asked, turning back to the child. She made a sound that seemed almost like negation, then pointed at Drake, then back to the star. "Me? What about me and that star?" The pressure returned, and Drake had a momentary impression of vast distances, of worlds unlike anything humans had discovered, of a civilization that had been watching Earth for longer than humanity, had been recording its own history. Coming formed the thought in his mind, they coming. A cold knot formed in Drake's stomach. "Who's coming?" "Your people." The child's expression shifted into something Drake couldn't interpret, but the emotional impressions filtering through their strange connection carried something like sorrow mixed with urgency. Before she could communicate further, the colony's alert system blared to life, red emergency lights pulsing throughout all quarters. "Attention, all personnel," came the automated announcement. "Unidentified objects approaching colony perimeter. This is not a drill. Security teams report to stations. All non-essential personnel remain in quarters until further notice." Drake moved to the viewport again. In the distance, beyond the blue-white star that had caught his attention, several objects were moving, too fast and too purposeful to be natural phenomena. His military training assessed the situation automatically. Multiple craft, formation suggesting coordination, direct approach vector to the colony. Not the behavior of a rescue party. "They're not here for a friendly chat, are they?" Drake asked, turning back to the child. Her expression confirmed his suspicions. Whatever was approaching, it meant danger, not just to her, but to the entire colony. "I need to get you somewhere safe," Drake said, already moving to gather essential supplies. His mind raced through the colony's layout, identifying potential hiding places. The maintenance tunnels near the old ore processing facility were rarely monitored, too much interference from the machinery for reliable surveillance. The child made a distressed sound and pointed again to the viewport, more insistently this time. The pressure returned to Drake's mind, stronger now, almost desperate in its intensity. "Not hide. Call. Call. Call who?" The child pointed to Drake's chest, then to the stars. "Others like me need you." Voice. Drake shook his head in confusion. "I don't understand. How am I supposed to call anyone? I'm just a miner." The pressure intensified, and suddenly Drake's mind filled with images. Humans throughout history looking skyward, ancient structures aligned with celestial bodies, and something else. A genetic memory buried deep within human DNA, a connection to the stars that predated recorded history. Before miners, before soldiers. First contact. Remember. The images shifted to what Drake somehow knew were memories, not his own, but the child's. A civilization of beings like her, watching Earth from afar, making contact with early humans. Knowledge shared, then hidden as humans turned toward violence. Guardians appointed among humanity, carrying a genetic marker that would allow them to reconnect when the time came. You carry mark. Your blood remembers. Call them. Drake staggered under the weight of these revelations, bracing himself against the wall. This is insane. I'm nobody, just a washed-up soldier who couldn't even save his own squad. The colony's alert system blared again. Unknown vessels have breached outer defensive perimeter. All personnel report to emergency shelters. Security teams engage defensive protocols. Through the viewport, Drake could see the approaching craft more clearly now. Their design shared elements with the crashed pod, the same flowing lines and iridescent material, but these were clearly weaponized, bristling with what could only be offensive capabilities. They moved with a predatory grace, spreading out to surround the colony. "They're not your people, are they?" Drake asked, though he already knew the answer. The child's expression darkened, and the trilling sound she made carried unmistakable tones of fear. "Hunters. Find me. Find all like me. Destroy." Drake felt a familiar calm settling over him, the same detached focus that had carried him through dozens of combat situations. "Then we need to move. Now." He quickly packed a survival kit, rations, medical supplies, a portable atmosphere generator, and the few tools he could repurpose as weapons. The child watched him with those cosmic eyes, occasionally making soft, trilling sounds that somehow conveyed approval. As Drake lifted her into his arms, prepared to venture into the maintenance tunnels, she placed a hand against his chest, directly over his heart. The pressure in his mind returned, but different now, directed rather than searching. Remember, blood knows. Something awakened within Drake, a sensation like static electricity running beneath his skin, concentrating in his chest before spreading outward along his nervous system. His vision blurred momentarily, then sharpened with preternatural clarity. The stars visible through the viewport seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, and Drake understood with sudden certainty that he was connected to something vast and ancient. The knowledge came in fragments, humanity's true origins, the genetic modifications made by visitors from the stars, bloodlines preserved through millennia to maintain connection. Drake saw himself as a link in that chain, carrying dormant abilities that had remained hidden throughout his life. "I'm one of them, a guardian," he whispered, the concept simultaneously alien and familiar, like remembering something from a dream. The child made an affirmative sound, cosmic eyes reflecting Drake's own image back at him, but changed, overlaid with something luminous and ancient. "Call them now." Drake moved to the viewport, placing his palm against the transparent material. The approaching enemy vessels were minutes away from weapons range. Whatever he was supposed to do, it needed to happen quickly. "I don't know how," he admitted, frustration edging his voice. The child pointed to the blue-white star that had caught Drake's attention earlier. "Focus. Feel. Remember." Drake closed his eyes and concentrated on the star, visualizing its pulsing light. The static sensation beneath his skin intensified, becoming almost painful in its urgency. Something within him recognized this state, not consciously, but at a cellular level, as if his DNA itself was responding to an ancient command. When Drake opened his eyes again, his hand against the viewport had begun to emit a soft blue light, pulsing in rhythm with the distant star. The light spread up his arm, across his chest, until his entire body glowed with the same ethereal luminescence. Each pulse sent a wave of energy outward, invisible to normal human perception but blazing across the cosmos on frequencies that only certain beings would detect. The call had been made. The colony rocked with the first impacts as the enemy vessels opened fire. Alarms blared throughout the structure, and Drake could hear the chaos of evacuation procedures mixed with the sounds of the colony's meager defenses returning fire. "We need to move," Drake said, gathering the child in his arms again. "Those tunnels I mentioned should keep us safe until what? Until help arrived from stars that might be hundreds of light years distant. Until the colony was destroyed, and they were left stranded on a moon with a rapidly deteriorating atmosphere." Drake pushed the thoughts aside, survival first, existential concerns later. As they slipped into the maintenance tunnels, Drake's enhanced senses mapped the colony's interior with unprecedented clarity. He could hear heartbeats through walls, smell fear sweat and weapons discharge, sense the structural weaknesses developing as the attack continued. The child remained quiet in his arms, occasionally directing him with gentle pressure against his mind when they approached junctions. They had nearly reached the abandoned ore processing facility when they encountered the first of the hunters. It stood 2 meters tall, its body covered in the same flowing material as its vessels, but configured as armor that shifted and adapted with each movement. Where the child's features held a certain delicacy, this being's face was angular and predatory, those same cosmic eyes narrowed with lethal focus. It carried a weapon that seemed bonded to its arm, more organic extension than manufactured tool. Drake reacted on instinct, pushing the child behind him and dropping into a combat stance. The hunter made a sound, not the musical trilling of the child, but a harsh, grating noise that set Drake's teeth on edge. It raised its weapon, the end glowing with building energy. Time seemed to slow. Drake felt the awakened power surging through him, responding to the immediate threat. He raised his hand, not consciously knowing what would happen, but trusting the ancient knowledge now flowing through his blood. Energy gathered in his palm, the same blue-white light that had emanated during his call to the stars, and when the hunter fired, Drake released it in a countering wave. The energies collided in mid-air, creating a shockwave that threw both combatants backward. Drake recovered first, decades of combat training asserting themselves. He launched forward, covering the distance to the hunter before it could bring its weapon to bear again. The fight became hand-to-hand, Drake's enhanced strength matching the alien's natural power. The hunter was fast, its movements fluid and unpredictable, but Drake found himself anticipating each attack with uncanny precision. The genetic memories awakened within him included combat techniques developed over thousands of years, refined through encounters with various species across the galaxy. His body moved with a grace he had never known, executing counters and strikes that felt both foreign and intimately familiar. When the final blow came, Drake driving the hunter's own weapon up through what passed for its jaw, the alien's cosmic eyes widened in shock. Recognition flashed in those stellar depths, followed by fear. Drake felt the hunter's dying thoughts brush against his mind. Guardian. Thought extinct. Drake pulled the weapon free, watching as the hunter's body collapsed and began to dissolve, the flowing armor liquefying and evaporating into the air. He turned back to the child, who watched him with an expression mixing awe and satisfaction. Remember more now, came her thought. Drake nodded grimly, examining the weapon that had bonded to his own arm, replacing the hunter's. It felt right against his skin, responsive to his thoughts in a way no human technology had ever been. Yes, I remember. The knowledge continued to unfold within him. The ancient war between factions of star travelers, guardians appointed on thousands of worlds to maintain balance, the hunters who sought to eliminate those guardians, and the charges they protected. Earth had once been a key world in this cosmic conflict, before humanity's guardians were systematically eliminated in what humans recorded in their myths as great floods, fiery destructions of cities, angels of death passing over homes. Drake had been born carrying dormant guardian genes, activated now by the presence of the child and the imminent threat. He was not the only one. There would be others on Earth and its colonies, their abilities similarly dormant, waiting for the call he had sent. "Your name?" Drake said suddenly, looking at the child. "I should know your name." The child trilled softly, and in Drake's mind formed a concept rather than a word, an identity tied to stellar phenomena, to light crossing vast distances, to potential waiting to be realized. "Lyra?" Drake translated, the name feeling right in his mouth. "I'll call you Lyra." The child, Lyra, made an approving sound and pointed toward the direction they had been heading before the hunter's appearance. "More coming. Must reach transmitter." "Transmitter?" Drake questioned, but even as he asked, the knowledge unfolded in his mind. The ore processing facility contained machinery that could be reconfigured to amplify the call he had already sent, extending its range and urgency. "Right. Let's move." They continued through the tunnels, encountering occasional groups of panicked miners fleeing toward emergency shelters. None questioned why Drake carried a strange child, or why his arm now bore what was clearly alien technology. Crisis had a way of focusing people on their own survival to the exclusion of curiosity. The processing facility stood abandoned, emergency protocols having evacuated all personnel. Drake moved through the massive machinery with purpose, Lyra directing him with gentle mental nudges toward components they would need. His newly awakened knowledge recognized how to repurpose the industrial equipment, how to create interfaces between human technology and the more advanced systems now partially integrated into his body. As they worked, the colony continued to shake under assault. Through newly enhanced senses, Drake could perceive the battle above them, the hunters' vessels systematically destroying the colony's defenses, methodically working toward a ground invasion that would allow them to search for Lyra and eliminate any potential guardians among the human population. "They're looking for you," Drake stated as he connected a power conduit to the modified transmission array. "But they're also looking for others like me, aren't they? This isn't just about capturing you." Lyra's mental touch carried confirmation and additional context. The hunters had been methodically eliminating Guardian bloodlines across multiple worlds, seeing them as the primary obstacle to their expansion. Her people, caretakers who monitored the development of younger species, had been trying to reactivate dormant Guardian genes before the hunters could complete their purge. The crash of her vessel had been no accident, but a deliberate last-ditch effort by her protectors to place her near someone with Guardian potential. They had sacrificed themselves to ensure she reached Earth's solar system, knowing the hunters would follow, but hoping it would buy enough time for Guardians to awaken. "So I'm part of a backup plan," Drake said, a hint of bitter amusement in his voice. "His last line of defense." Lyra made a negative, trilling sound, her mental impression carrying correction. "Not last line, first wave of renewal. The beginning of humanity reclaiming its cosmic heritage, not merely as protected children of the stars, but as active participants in a conflict older than their recorded history." Drake completed the final connections on the transmitter. The machinery hummed with power, displays flickering as human technology struggled to channel energies it had never been designed to handle. "This won't hold together long," he warned, "maybe minutes before it burns out." Lyra nodded understanding and placed her hand against the primary conduit. Her body glowed with the same luminescence Drake had exhibited earlier, feeding additional power into the system. She looked to Drake expectantly. He understood what was needed. Placing his hand beside hers, Drake opened himself to the awakened power flowing through his veins. The blue-white energy spread from his palm into the machinery, merging with Lyra's contribution. Together, they created a signal that pulsed outward at speeds defying conventional physics, carrying both warning and awakening to every corner of human-inhabited space. Through their connected energies, Drake could sense the impact, dormant genes activating in thousands of humans across Earth and its colonies, ancient knowledge unfurling in minds that had never suspected their true heritage. Some would resist the awakening, others would embrace it, but all would now have a choice that had been denied to generations of humans before them. The transmitter began to overload, components glowing white-hot as they channeled energies beyond their design parameters. Drake pulled Lyra away just before the first components exploded, shielding her with his body as the chain reaction destroyed the makeshift device. "Did it work?" he asked, though he could already sense the answer through their connection. Lyra's expression conveyed both triumph and solemnity. "Begun. Not finished." The floor beneath them shuddered with a different kind of impact. The hunters had landed forces within the colony and were sweeping through the structures. Drake could sense them moving closer, drawn to the energy signature of the transmission. "We need to keep moving," he said, lifting Lyra into his arms again. "There's an emergency shuttle bay near here. If we can reach it." An explosion rocked the facility, tearing through the far wall and showering them with debris. Through the newly created opening stepped 3 hunters, their weapons already raised and charging. Behind Drake, the only exit was blocked by collapsed machinery, leaving them cornered. The odds were impossible. Even with his awakened abilities, Drake couldn't hope to defeat 3 hunters simultaneously while protecting Lyra. He set her down behind the minimal cover of a processing unit and stepped forward, the alien weapon on his arm charging with blue-white energy. "I'll stay back," he told Lyra. "If you see an opening, run. I'll hold them as long as I can." Her mental touch carried distress, but acceptance. She had known from the beginning that sacrifices would be necessary. The hunters advanced cautiously, communicating with each other through harsh vocalizations that Drake's awakened mind partly understood. They recognized him as an active guardian, a threat to be eliminated with extreme prejudice. Drake fired first, the weapon releasing a concentrated burst of energy that caught the lead hunter in the chest, blasting it backward into its companions. The advantage was momentary. The other two hunters recovered quickly, spreading out to divide his attention. One fired, forcing Drake to dive sideways, while the other advanced in a flanking maneuver. The battle became a desperate dance of attack and evasion, Drake using the processing facility's equipment as cover, while the hunters methodically destroyed his hiding places. He managed to wound a second hunter, but the exertion of channeling the unfamiliar energies was taking its toll. His reactions slowed, precision faltering. A blast caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into a control panel. Pain lanced through his body, the wound cauterized by the same energy that had created it. Drake tried to stand but found his left arm unresponsive, the neural connection severed by the hunter's weapon. The remaining hunters approached, weapons leveled at his chest, cosmic eyes cold with triumph. Drake's thoughts turned to Lyra, hoping she had found a way to escape during the fight, but a quick glance revealed her still hiding behind the processing unit, her small form trembling. "I'm sorry," Drake whispered, closing his eyes and preparing for the final blow. It never came. A new sound filled the facility, a harmonic resonance that made the air itself vibrate. The hunters froze, their predatory confidence giving way to confusion, then unmistakable fear. Drake opened his eyes to see the blue-white star that had caught his attention earlier, now blazing through the facility's viewport with impossible brightness, as if it had somehow moved closer. But not closer, Drake realized. Arrived. Space rippled and tore outside the colony, and through the rupture emerged vessels that dwarfed anything Drake had seen before. Their design echoed elements of Lyra's crashed pod, but evolved and refined to a degree that made them seem almost mythological, leviathans of light and flowing metal that moved with living grace through the void. The hunters' vessels, moments ago so threatening, now resembled mere insects beside these cosmic giants. Energy lanced between them, the hunters, ships disintegrating on contact. Within the facility, the remaining hunters abandoned their attack on Drake, turning their weapons toward the viewport in futile defiance. Lyra emerged from hiding, her small form now pulsing with intense light as she stepped toward the viewport. She raised her hand, and the pressure in Drake's mind returned, not gentle now but powerful, a torrent of communication flowing through their connection to the newly arrived vessels. Called, they came, caretakers. The hunters fired at Lyra, but their weapons' energy dissipated harmlessly before reaching her, absorbed by the field of light surrounding her small form. She turned toward them, and for the first time, Drake saw something other than vulnerability in her stance, power, ancient and terrible, compressed into a child's form but no less devastating for its containment. With a gesture, Lyra redirected the hunters' own energy back upon them, their bodies disintegrating into particles of light that scattered across the facility floor before fading to nothing. Drake struggled to his feet, the pain in his shoulder intense but secondary to the awe overwhelming his senses. Outside the viewport, the battle, if it could be called that, ended as swiftly as it had begun. The hunters' vessels were gone, the colony now surrounded by the protective presence of the caretakers, ships. "You knew they would come," Drake said, his voice hoarse. "You just needed time." Lyra approached him, placing her small hand against his wounded shoulder. Warmth spread from her touch, accelerating the healing already begun by his enhanced physiology. Not knew, hoped, needed voice to call. Your voice. And now, what happens to the colony? To Earth. Lyra's cosmic eyes reflected the lights of the caretaker vessels as they positioned themselves around the colony, already beginning repairs to the damage inflicted by the hunters. Choice, always choice. Guardians awaken. Humans remember. Stars welcome or stars wait. Your choice. Drake understood. The transmission they had sent had awakened dormant guardians across human space. But what humanity did with this reawakening, whether they embraced their cosmic heritage or retreated from it, would be their decision. The caretakers would not force evolution or involvement. They would only create the opportunity and protect those who chose to remember. Lyra's mental touch carried images of possible futures, humans working alongside other species among the stars, guardian abilities fully integrated into human culture. Earth taking its place in a cosmic community it had forgotten it belonged to, but also alternatives, humans choosing isolation, guardians remaining few and hidden, the stars waiting another millennium for humanity's return. "And you?" Drake asked, suddenly aware of how quickly he had come to care for this strange child from the stars. "Will you stay?" Lyra's expression softened, her trilling taking on a gentle, almost melodic quality. Learning time, growing time, need teacher, need protector, need father. The word resonated through their connection with layers of meaning beyond its simple human definition. Mentor, guardian, guide, family. Drake felt tears gathering in his eyes, emotions he had buried after the loss of his squad on Mars, resurfacing with unexpected intensity. "I'm broken," he whispered. "Failed my men, exiled myself. I don't know if I can be what you need." Lyra placed her hand over his heart, where the guardian energies pulsed strongest. Not broken, waiting. Like guardian blood waited. For purpose, for connection, for stars to call your name again. Through the viewport, Drake could see shuttles deploying from the caretaker vessels, approaching the colony with clear purpose. First contact, official first contact, would soon begin, humanity's cosmic relatives returning after thousands of years of watching from afar. Drake would have a role to play in what followed, translator, mediator, living proof of humanity's connection to the stars. The past he had run from, the skills he had tried to bury, the capacity for leadership he had denied after Mars, all would be needed in the days ahead. But more important than any of those roles was the one Lyra offered, a chance to protect rather than destroy, to nurture rather than fight, to be family to a child who had crossed galaxies to find him, to turn exile into homecoming. Drake lifted Lyra into his arms, her slight weight feeling right against his chest. Together they watched as the first shuttle docked with the colony, caretakers preparing to meet their long-separated human cousins. The stars beyond seemed brighter now, their light carrying not just illumination but recognition, ancient connections remembered, calling Drake by a name older than humanity itself. "Let's go meet your family," Drake said, stepping toward whatever future awaited, "and introduce them to what's left of mine." Lyra's answering trill carried pure joy, echoing through their connection with the certainty that neither of them would ever truly be alone again. The stars had called, and together they had answered.